Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about this World War II American helmet that was found in Remagen, Germany, and the very surprising results that researching the helmet yielded. So first of all, a very brief history of Remagen. Remagen is a town in western Germany where there's a bridge, and the story of that bridge during World War II has been made famous by the movie called The Bridge at Remagen. Very briefly, in early 1945, this was the last bridge still intact on the Rhine River, and the Americans kind of unexpectedly managed to capture it intact on 7th of March 1945. So they managed to get troops across into, let's say, the heart of Germany. And over the next days, the Germans tried desperately by all means possible to destroy the bridge, and it actually ended up collapsing on its own a few days later, but after numerous troops had already gotten across. And in the meantime, the Americans had also built several pontoon bridges downstream from the Remagen Bridge. So one of the people who saw my videos on YouTube, called Christian Koenig, contacted me and sent me an email explaining to me that when he was visiting Remagen a few years ago in 2018, when there was a drought, he saw an American helmet in the mud of the Rhine River. So he picked the helmet up and he was surprised to see that it still had remains of a camouflage net on it. And he brought the helmet back home, and when he was at home, he noticed that there were some initials written on the helmet and some numbers, apparently EM or FM, and then 3577. And the location where he found the helmet is exactly here. So this is where the Remagen Bridge is, and this is where he found the helmet. So slightly downstream from the Remagen Bridge, at the area where the Americans had built their pontoon bridges. So Christian Koenig contacted me because he was wondering how to research these engravings that were visible inside the helmet. So these are what we call a laundry number. It means the last four numbers of a soldier's serial number and the initial of his family name. So I explained to him how he could research this, and since it seemed a bit complicated, he decided actually just to send the helmet over to me, and I could do whatever I wanted with it and try to research it myself. I had been a bit surprised by the description that Christian had made of the helmet, saying it still had a netting on it and things like that, which seemed hard to believe after so many years. But when the helmet arrived, sure enough, you can see that it still has netting visible on the outside, as well as remains as a rubber band to hold the net in place. The liner, which is out of some kind of synthetic material, is still brand new, but the actual metallic shell of the helmet is in extremely poor condition. So this is kind of typical of a water find, where cloth things can be preserved, but the metal itself is in very poor condition. And then when I closely inspected the liner, I saw that the actual inscriptions in the helmet were not EM as Christian had thought, but ELM 3577, and then written a second time ELM. So ELM is the soldier's initials, and 3577 are the last numbers of his serial number. These laundry numbers are usually pretty much impossible to research, as I explained in one of my former videos called Hell on Wheels and Hell to Research, because since it's only half the soldier's serial number and only the first letter of his last name, usually these numbers can correspond to something like 50 to 100 soldiers. And then trying to figure out which one of these 50 to 100 soldiers is the right one can be extremely complicated, or even I would say impossible most of the time. In this case, however, we have not just one letter, but the soldier's full initials, and this can make the research easier, hopefully. So I went online to the website called WWII which enables you to research these laundry numbers, and with laundry number M3577, there's 71 possible matches. But then when I looked at all the matches, only one of them had the initials ELM. A guy called Earl L. McCorkle, born in 1924. Now, contrary to what's written here, he's not from Alaska. These online records are full of mistakes and also usually incomplete. So I went to look him up on the actual National Archives website, and here I see that he's from Pennsylvania. And then by some more Googling, I found out that he had been living in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, and that he had passed away in 1985. I wasn't able to find any other significant information online. Now the question is Earl McCorkle the right person? Since these online databases are usually incomplete. Maybe there's another guy who also had the same initials, but who's not on the list, or there's a mistake in his name, or something like that. So what I need now is to confirm that Earl McCorkle actually was at Remagen at some point in time. So I sent a letter to the town hall of Elizabeth, asking if they knew anything about Earl McCorkle and if he had any family and if they could forward my letter to his family. And simultaneously, I ordered a copy of his military file from the National Archives in St. Louis. Now, what you have to know about the St. Louis archives is that they burnt down in 1973. So for most American soldiers, their files have burnt and there's nothing left of them, except perhaps a few papers dating from after the fire, like correspondence the veteran had with the administration or something like that. So usually they just consist of a few pages that date from after 1973. And in the case of Earl McCorkle, his file consisted of only 6 pages, and they didn't mention his unit. But they did mention 2 interesting things. The first thing is that he was in the Engineers, and that's just the kind of people who would be on a damaged bridge or building pontoon bridges. And the second interesting thing is that he mentions in these documents that he misplaced his separation documents over the years. So if he's the kind of guy who misplaces his separation documents, maybe he's also the kind of guy who might have misplaced his helmet. But basically these files don't bring any kind of confirmation, they're a dead end. And soon afterwards, the town hall of Elizabeth forwarded the letter I had sent to Earl McCorkle's daughters. He had had 3 daughters after the war, and they got my letter and they contacted me by email. And I explained to them that this helmet might be their father's, but that I wasn't sure and that I needed some kind of confirmation. So I asked them if they knew where he had been in service, if they knew his unit and all that. And his daughters actually knew very little. They just knew that he had been in Germany during the war. They did manage to find a few wartime pictures of Earl McCorkle, but these pictures were also completely unspecific. There's no insignia visible, there's no unit number visible, there's nothing that could indicate that he was at Remagen Bridge at some point in time. So it seemed that once again, despite a lot of work, this laundry number research was just going to lead to a dead end with, some potential candidates, but no confirmation that this soldier was actually the right one. And then the family managed to turn up another picture taken after the war, showing Earl McCorkle at a veterans reunion. And on the picture you can see a sign, and the sign indicates that it's a reunion for the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion. In other words, one of the exact engineer battalions that was involved in building the pontoon bridges downstream from the Remagen Bridge. So this was the smoking gun I had been waiting for, and that confirmed that Earl McCorkle had indeed been present at Remagen Bridge. And not only had he been present at the bridge, he was actually one of the guys involved with building these pontoon bridges under fire from the Germans in the days after the bridge had been captured. So Earl McCorkle's daughters asked me to send them the helmet, and they wanted to donate it to a local museum called the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall in Pittsburgh. At first I was a bit hesitant about sending the helmet to a museum because everybody knows that museums have thousands and thousands of donations and they only actually expose something like 1% of their collections, and the other 99% is in a basement somewhere. And furthermore, this helmet is in very bad condition, and some museums don't want items that are in bad condition. But the museum curator, Michael Kraus, contacted me, and he reassured me saying that the helmet would be on permanent display, and it was very obvious from reading his emails that despite the fact the helmet was in poor condition, that he considered it a real historical treasure, just like I do. And surprisingly, the museum actually already had a display specifically about the Remagen Bridge, so the helmet would fit into that display perfectly. So I decided to send the helmet over to the US, where it arrived shortly before the 80th anniversary of the Remagen battle. And any doubts I had had about donating the helmet to the museum were quickly swept away by the images I was sent, showing the helmet arriving at Soldiers and Sailors Hall, and the emotion of Earl McCorkle's daughters when they saw their father's helmet for the first time 80 years after it had been lost in the Rhine River.
Inside the package, if you haven't cried yet, you'll cry. Handwritten letter. 6 January 2025. We wish this helmet a safe trip back after its 80-year swim in the Rhine at Remagen. It's not even the good part yet. A big thank you to Earl L. McCorkle for his help in liberating Europe. Sincerely, Christian Koenig and Jean-Luc Gasset.